Hello and welcome to episode 29 of the Freo Big Footy podcast. This week we'll be reviewing the Friday night, use of disaster against North Melbourne, with Fremantle being beaten quite comfortably in the end, even though the scoreboard probably flattered us a little bit. 10 goals 14-74 to 8 goals 13-61. And then we'll also have a quick review of the Peel game. We'll have a look at potential changes for the squads this week, seeing we're doing it on a Wednesday night. And then we'll have a look at the upcoming derby, where Fremantle are warm favourites at the moment. Joining us this week is our resident Victorian expert and head cheer squad leader, Seppo. How are you, mate? Good to join you. Good for you to join us.
Yeah, it's good to be back and hopefully not looking backwards but forwards for next week's game of footy, as we've come off 2 losses. It's hard to talk football at the moment, but I am excited. There's been a lot of fortune going our way this week, and I'm just excited to move on to the next game.
Absolutely. And also joining us this week is our Warrnambool journalist expert and blogger, Freo blogger, Justine. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Good to be back on.
Excellent. All right, so just having a quick review of the game last week. Obviously, Fremantle tended to win in most of the key areas that you would generally look at in things like contested ball, tackles, clearances, all that sort of stuff. But unfortunately, our dismal entries inside 50 really ended up hurting us, and we just didn't get enough score on the board, considering that we didn't score a goal, I think, in the last quarter, and we were sort of a comfortable sort of nearly 4 goals up at quarter time, and then obviously just sort of fell apart from there. What did you think of the game, Seppo? Obviously watching it on TV from over there.
Yeah, it was an interesting game. I was a bit nervous going into the game, knowing that, these big occasions and North are a better side than what they were a few years ago. I expected them to test us, but it was a great start, followed by a concerning sort of second and third quarter where we failed to capitalise, and it was our biggest issue because it looked like we were in it while we were still winning those key stats, and North seemed to be like they were getting real lucky ones, and those junk time goals, and the way they it almost seemed like we deserved to win it. But as we failed to capitalise, I sort of knew by the end of that last quarter that we weren't going to win it and they were going to run away with it. It's really it was a very weird feeling. I was more upset about this result than I was about the big drubbing by Hawthorn, because it seemed like this is a game that we should have won, but we watched it slip away from our hands as we had control of it, and we let it slip and let North get a win. And let's just hope this game doesn't come back to bite us at the end of the year like it did with the Essendon game, you could say, this time last season.
Yeah. Obviously, Justine, you would have seen it yourself on the TV. What were your thoughts on the performance?
Yeah, pretty much the same as Seppo. I was pretty happy with our start. I thought it was pretty emphatic. The pressure was up and we looked like we were really on the ball, which had sort of been lacking a little bit in previous weeks. Obviously, North Melbourne got a couple of quick goals at the end of the first quarter and sort of got a bit of confidence there. And I sort of felt as the game went on that we were sort of right in it and we were probably going to sneak away with a win, to be honest. And then in that last quarter, those inside 50s were just terrible, like bombing it long to Pavlich, no direction, no crummers at his feet. And obviously North Melbourne did well to keep repelling it out, and they got a few quick goals on the counter-attack and it really hurt us. And I thought in most areas we did quite well, but we were a bit sloppy with the ball, and composure was down, as Ross has mentioned a fair few times throughout the week. And in the end, we probably didn't deserve to win because we didn't capitalise on those chances. Like, if you've got 55 inside 50s for the game and get 8 goals, and in the last quarter 16 inside 50s for no goals, it really paints a pretty bleak picture. And you don't deserve to win if you're not going to make the most of your chances.
Absolutely. Yeah,
the big point I've noticed is with our first few games, and even the way we played last year, our last quarters were really good, and I think we still rank. I heard a stat on the radio that we rank 3rd or 4th in terms of like a full year of last quarter finishes. So we used to be, and you could say we still are, a very good finishing side, but I wonder if the consecutive short breaks between travelling to Sydney and coming back and playing on the Friday night has affected our endurance, because certainly the effort was there, but I wonder if playing under the fatigue and finally got to them, that the fact that we only kicked, I think it was basically 5 points after halfway through the third, was a real indictment to what we're usually renowned for. And it's
A lot of those shots on goal too seem to just fall short right on the goal line, get touched and that. So there wasn't obviously enough effort in the kicking, and it just sort of kept falling short every time, and which was pretty frustrating.
It's almost an element of fatigue you could see, and you just hope now that we're going to the Derby with a 9-day break, we can actually rectify it. Because it's good to. I was really concerned about the result, say we should have won it, but then after hearing a couple of the post-match press conferences and Ross talk on Monday night on 6PR, it was sort of good to see that he was happy with our effort and the players lifted. It's just a bit of that, too much bombing the ball and kicking to Pav and a bit of those execution things that if we clean that up, sounds minor, even though the result was major against us. It's good to know that we can, and we are on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think, and even watching a couple of sort of replays of games last year, I mean, the loss of Walters for us is quite pronounced, I think, and it really does hurt our forward line without, and particularly having Valentine out as well, having, as you said, that extra crummer. It's just that those sort of two players require a player to stay on them all the time. You can't leave Walters 5-10 metres free, where you can just see the North Melbourne defenders in particular were just sort of sagging off Crozier and just not really paying him any respect. And unfortunately, Hayden wasn't able to sort of capitalise on it, or even get the guys to lower their eyes and lead and sort of give that alternate sort of position there. I mean, the other concern obviously for us is, although Pavlich is our main target, probably some of our other lesser lights, who guys that we thought were good depth players, just at the moment haven't been able to step up, or their form has dropped off from last year. And I think, there's been plenty of talk on the forums this week about that, and I don't think, and even the players themselves, but guys like Main hasn't sort of come up to the same level he did last year. I don't think Nick Subin has played particularly well this year so far. Lockie Neal seems to be not as pronounced as he was, and, I just wonder if, as I said, and even Tom Sheridan, although he's had limited time, we just aren't getting that same production out of those guys as what we have in the past.
That was a good point about De Boer. It was interesting that he was subbed off, and it didn't look like an injury. And you just wonder if that's a sign of someone being subbed for poor form, like we have done in the past when we haven't been going. So it'd be interesting to actually know why he was subbed off, and if he is on the chopping block for this week, because it's just interesting with some of those players that you could see Ross is going to back them in. I know Spur got a bit of criticism, but he kept Lindsay Thomas pretty much goalless for most of the game until he got one late, the one that sort of sealed the game for them. So at least some of those guys have been performing, and Ross is going to back a lot of those guys in on the selection table to get better. But I wonder if some are stagnating, or if not going backwards from what you said, the output last year.
Well, I think the area when you're talking about De Boer, like obviously De Boer wasn't hurting North Melbourne at all, and he wasn't getting much of the ball himself. I think he only had 6 possessions for the game, and the reality was that North were rebounding quite comfortably off half back. So if the ball's not really giving you that pressure and even able to rotate through the middle, I think they just needed to try and have an alternate, and I think that's why they maybe brought Sheridan on, so they could rotate maybe one of those other forwards through there just to give an alternate contest. But that didn't seem to work either. They just, as you said, they just sort of tended to bomb the ball, as you were saying, Justine, just way too high, and it just didn't give our forwards any chance. And without having any legitimate crummers there, we just really struggled to get that avenue to goal. So it'll certainly be a game hopefully we learn from, and it certainly shows the boys that we've got quite a bit to do before the end of the year if we want to A, play finals, and B, get in that top 4 spot, that's for sure. Any other points you want to bring up, Justine, from the game? Or
No, let's move on, I reckon.
How about you, Seppo? Anything else you want to...
Well, the only other positive is you could sort of take out of it is Fife was pretty good right the way through, very consistent, and sort of one of the shining lights through, you say, an average performance from most. So, and I think he got rated equal best in the coaches' votes. I think he got equal 8 along with 2 of the other North guys, Gibson and Harvey. So good to see that Fife is recognised by both coaches.
Yeah, the other interesting player before we move on is probably, there is obviously a lot of talk about him on the forums, and you speak to players or people around the group, is Sutcliffe, young Cameron. And Sutcliffe obviously is playing down the back as our small defender, and I mean, that's not his position. I don't think he's ever played there as a junior. He's always been that midfielder, and he does have really good run. And I think he probably gets a little, unfairly maligned at times, because the reality is we don't have another small defender on the list. And who can play those really smalls that effectively, like Clancy, can play down back, but he doesn't have the agility or speed to play on those smaller guys. And even the other ones like Ibbotson and Duffield really struggle against those quick and nimble guys. So the reality is, if we don't play Sutcliffe down there, I don't know who else we have on our list who's capable of doing the role. So it'll be certainly interesting to see what happens in the next few weeks, because I think, occasionally he makes a few clangers out there, but generally he makes reasonably good decisions most of the time.
He's great in the ball in handy when he's on the rebound, but it's a defensive side of his game plan and his tackling and defensive sort of positioning. It's a bit to work with, but you really hope that guys like Spur and Ibbo and Duffield are, when they're all out there, is doing the job to cover him.
Another interesting thing was probably that North Melbourne went in with 3 tall forwards, with Petrie, Aaron Black and Majak Daw, and we probably didn't get the same. I thought Johnson played well, but we still struggled with that +1. We couldn't get the +1 we wanted down back, and we didn't utilise it that effectively. And obviously, and I know a few people, I don't know how it looked on the TV, but I know a few people at the ground were quite frustrated with Dawson. Dawson's game I didn't think he was that bad, but I mean, obviously you guys might have seen it slightly differently on the telly because of the amount of ball that was coming down there. But obviously he didn't play his best game, and when he tried to do that soccer off the ground in the second quarter.
Oh yeah,
that certainly didn't look.
Usually they come off for him, that little race there where he goes to commit to that ball, but that time it was a bit of a facepalm moment for him. I think one he'll want to have again.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting as well with obviously Boomer Harvey came out and they were trying to get him the ball a lot early on and sort of break Crowell in. They sort of ended up moving him, so it was obviously a win for them as well. So it'll be interesting to see, as you said, how the boys come out this week and who they pick up, and hopefully we'll see a much better performance up, especially bringing the ball inside 50, that's for sure. All right. Also during the week we had the Peel game, where Peel obviously trying to get their first win under in the season. With obviously there was a lot of talk about the alignment and how Fremantle would go with the Peel alignment. Did any of you guys manage to see it on the ABC iView during the week or not?
No, I haven't, but I've just managed to have a quick look over the stats and read the Waffle report that came out. More interested in just seeing really the stats of how the players and the reports on how they went in the end. So, especially as if you've got guys like Morabito out there and Kepler Bradley all returning, and even guys like Griffin as well, who are recovering from injuries. It's just great to see that those guys got out there, had a good run. And even some of the younger guys like Brady Gray and Jacob Ballard are putting good numbers in, to know that there's a bit of depth there. And it'll be great to see at least one of these new guys maybe get a gig at some point. And really good that Mora actually got off that report, as well as Vandeleur. Those guys are free to play. And it's just really good to hear those without seeing any of the footage of the game. Just really good to hear reports that those guys progressing well, despite Peel not actually getting the results on the board, but good for us.
Yeah, I think the WA, the Waffle Tribunal is always a bit of a, it's always interesting that whenever sort of anyone contests it, they generally tend to get off more often than not, as opposed to the AFL, when it's generally the opposite way. So, but I think it'll be interesting to see which way the match committee goes this week, particularly with Morabito. I mean, there was obviously some talk this week about him being selected maybe as a sub, and Mark Harvey tonight on 6PR had said he had mail that Morabito was a definite in. So it'll be interesting to see how they go in regards to that. And the other interesting one will be Ibbotson, who didn't play last week due to apparent illness, but whether they decide to bring him back as well. So
I think Morabito will play, because I don't see why Ross would have mentioned it in his Tuesday Channel 7 interview if it wasn't a very strong possibility. I mean, it only gets the hopes up for fans and everything like that. I sort of think he will play, and I think it'll be good if he does. Obviously, 3 years on the sidelines. To come back in will just provide a really big spark for the club at a time when we probably need it. And he's obviously played, 4 or 5 games for Peel now, and seems to have progressed quite well. And I mean, if he's fit and ready, why not give him a shot? Like, what's there to lose, really?
Yeah, he's put 5 games away for Peel so far, and it's amazing to hear every time we in the media mention something to Ross about Morabito's return. It's been, Morabito will say something in his own time and play it down, but all of a sudden this week there's been a massive swell of talk about Morabito and his return, especially after the Waffle report was dropped. So it really is good signs. He's close, and he may just get named as an emergency, or hopefully he'll come back as a sub, and that will be fantastic. It's good to see that his games through, and even the reports of where he's been playing for Peel, has been the mix of the half-back line and drifting forward. And the last few games, I think even just the one where he had that contest he got reported for, was right in the guts and on the ball. So it's great to see that he's ticked some boxes and playing at an intensity that will at least get him into AFL level. So really good to see.
And the other pleasing thing about the Peel game was the fact that Moller came out and kicked 4 goals, and Taberner sort of came out and had kicked 3 goals himself with 13 marks. So obviously he's taken the advice on board from the match committee and about going back and working hard at Peel. And I mean, you don't want to see those guys drop their heads, so it was pleasing to see him go back and do that. And obviously he's going to try and push for a spot. I mean, the week before I went down and watched Peel play against East Fremantle on the Good Friday. I think it was Good Friday game, and obviously Aitness was quite good on that game, but he obviously had picked up some sort of injury, which he seemed to play the game out, though I did miss the last 5 or 10 minutes of it. So hopefully he'll sort of be back sooner rather than later, because I don't think there's any other guys really in the list who played on the weekend that would be currently pushing for a spot. Though it was good to see Kepler Bradley also make a successful return back from the from his knee reconstruction. So maybe they may look at him or Jonathan Griffin as well, if because Zach Clark probably hasn't. He played really well the first game, but hasn't probably played as well as he normally can for the last couple. So he'd probably be under a bit of pressure to hold his spot, I would have thought, if he doesn't step up this week. All right, obviously moving on now to the big derby coming up this week. Obviously both teams, a win is critical for both teams. Both teams sitting 3-3 at the moment. Fremantle coming off a 2-game losing streak, and West Coast coming off 3 games, who sort of fell in a hole last week in the last quarter against Carlton when they had them on toast. And for West Coast, obviously for them to try and make the 8, and any sort of top 4 aspirations for both sides will really probably hinge on this game. If we in particular drop it, I think it's going to make it very tough for us to get in that top 4, and we probably need to look at 2 out of the next 3 games we probably want to get wins against, and they're both going to be, or they're all going to be reasonably tough, with the Derby, Port Adelaide and Geelong to come before the bye. It opens up for us a bit after the bye. I think the bottom 10 teams, out of the bottom 10 teams on the ladder, we've only played one of those sides, and that's been Essendon. So it will open up for a little bit for us after the break, but we definitely need to keep at least 2 wins in the next 3 games to keep those top 4 hopes alive. We have had the wood on West Coast probably the last 3 or 4 years, and obviously they'll take some heart from their pre-season wins. But when it comes down to it, it'll be interesting to see how both teams come out this week, coming off pretty poor performances, particularly for Fremantle compared to what they're used to.
Do you think Michael Barlow will come back in this week?
I would be surprised if he does. I think if Barlow comes in, he'll come in as a sub. So I think the only way he would come in is if they felt Morabito could play a full game in the AFL. I think one of those 2 will play as a sub, and I just couldn't see Barlow coming off without having a lot of training or full match games. I just think he would probably need another week unless he was coming in that sub role. So unless they feel Morabito could play a full game, I think one of those 2 will play in the subs. What do you think, Seppo?
I think the good thing about Barlow is that I think his type of injury, I think he mentioned it, that he wasn't out for a long stint and he didn't lose too much in his agility or the ability to run still. So I think whatever knock he got, he can still keep it up. And he's the type of player that's got a high fitness base, and he hasn't been out of the game like Morabito has. So he's got runs on the board, and if he's selected to play, it will be because he's fully fit and ready to go. I don't see Barlow being the type you'd want coming on in the 3rd quarter to have an impact. I think if he's good to go, he'll get the nod. And it sounds like he's not proppy, but didn't go 100% through today's training session. He's still got another chance on Friday. So a lot of water to go under the bridge between now and then. And Morabito really shouldn't be sort of had the baptism of fire and play a full game. So really, he really should come in through the sub. So hopefully Barlow's good to go, and I'd love Barlow to come back in, as well as Ballantyne, who served his week suspension. Yeah, but Morabito, if we're talking inclusions, it really just come down to those three: Ballas, Morabito, and Barlow, and they'll be great additions to the side. And I don't see too many others getting dropped on form or injury or suspension. Really, we're quite lucky. So we're trying to bring guys back in now and have to look to drop people on form or, really make some tough decisions to pull some of those younger guys out there and get close to our best 22.
Yeah, I mean, who do you obviously we need, if those three guys do come in, we need to drop 3 players from last week's game. Who do you think the 3 players potentially will go out will be?
Well, you'd have to probably look at the youngest 3, and without going on form, you never know about De Boer, but you've got Crozier, Neil, probably not Sutcliffe, but Sheridan. Those are the guys that you probably look at missing out of the lot, but it is very hard, and even Subin as well is one that hasn't been performing to his potential. They've got the chance to be dropped to let those guys come back in.
What about yourself, Justine? Who do you think could potentially make way?
Yeah, I was going to say the same as Seppo, but with Subin, he hasn't been in great form, and he's the type of player I think that if you do drop him, it would really give him a kick up the bum, and he'd go back, play well, and come back, sort of like he did last year when he was benched in that Hawthorn game down in Tasmania. It really kick-started his season, so maybe he needs a bit of a pump up to go down there, play well for Peel and come back and sort of take a game by the scruff of the neck, because he tends to sort of float in and out of matches a little bit, and when he's on, he's really good, but when he's off, he's not so good.
Yeah, I agree, and as you said, it'll be interesting to see, and obviously depending upon the way that they want to set up in that forward line, obviously, as you said, Crozier may be an opportunity, but the reality is if we're not going to have Walters for the next 12, 14 weeks, we really need to see whether those two can work together with Crozier and Ballantyne. So I think if we do end up dropping him, I think it's just not going to give us any continuity in that forward line. I think they have to play him and see whether he can at least work with Ballantyne or not. Because as I said, if it doesn't, then obviously going to have to go to another option down there. But I think it will be hard for them to do that with our forward line not functioning as it is. But I mean, granted, he got better as the game went along last week, but I think most of his work was done towards the end of the game where he took most of his possession. So you just wanted to see him involved in the game a little bit more.
Well, obviously Chris Mayne has been out of form this year, and Ross Lyon obviously was pretty happy with his game, going by what he said throughout the media this week. But he's still someone that's definitely way off standards from last year, and I know I can't see him getting dropped, but if we wanted to see how Crozier went, maybe instead of pushing him out of the side, maybe Mayne would be an option to get omitted, but I can't really see that happening the way Ross has spoken about him this week. But he really does need to start to fire up and show us what he can do, because we obviously know he's a very valuable player.
Yeah, it's unusual, really unusual for him only to have one tackle, and although his pressure acts probably weren't still even as much. I know I think he's had groin and back issues, and I think you can tell that. When I was watching him last week running off the ground, he just does not seem to be moving as well as he has been in the past. And whether
it was really evident in the Sydney game as well. The Main went to a contest that was coming at him. He sort of not shirked the contest, but went in softer than what he did last year. So there's something not right. If it's mentally or physically, he might be be right to play, but there must be something holding him back, and it might be something minor like a back complaint or something like that. You just don't hope that he plays through it and it doesn't progress. You just hope form and confidence will get him back to where he needs to be, because we know he can play well and he's handy to have, and Maine's the type of person that will love a tackle more than a goal. So hopefully he can stay in that side and get better, or it will be guys like Crozier that will add and string games together in that forward line.
All right, yeah, absolutely. So looking at the West Coast game obviously coming up, they've had they started off the year on pretty well but obviously playing some of the easier sides in the competition, and then they put a pretty spirited performance up against Port Adelaide, and probably a bit unlucky with bad kicking to lose that one. They probably should have won last week, being 4 or 5, nearly 5 goals up with half a quarter to go, and obviously they were outclassed in the end. So I mean, it's going to be a tough test for us. Obviously they've got a few form issues of their own, particularly obviously down being in WA. I mean, we're just hearing about Nick Naitanui all week.
Yeah, it's been the same over here.
Yeah, I've heard it here in Melbourne. It has spread across the Nullarbor, and we are hearing a lot of talk about Naitanui being, the talk of his injury and his form, and is he a good footballer or is he just an athlete? So it's interesting to actually hear some negative talk about Eagles over here in Melbourne, because it's not often. So there's something wrong there. But in general terms, their performances have been good against those weaker sides that are currently at the bottom of the ladder, and I think they come up a good test against us, and their injury list is in a lot of better shape than us. And other than Waters, I think that's gone for the whole season. They've got Lacroix out a bit for an arm that's close to coming back, and I think there's only Hearn and maybe Ellis that are out for a couple. That they really got a full list and going well. But it will be great to see a good test and a nice fired up derby, because usually ladder positions and where everyone is goes out the window when we play this mob.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see whether they go with... Last week they decided to run with 3 ruckmen with Scott Lycett, Cox and Naitanui, and it'll be interesting to see if they continue to go down that pathway this week, because obviously they've quite a tall side with Darling, Kennedy, McGovern, Schofield. I mean, that's quite a tall side, and I think that may have hurt them a little bit last week against Carlton, with probably having a little bit of lack of run towards the end of the game. And it'll be interesting to see whether, particularly on the biggest Subiaco, whether they decide that they're going to get more benefit out of having those taller guys on the ground, or whether they'll maybe drop one of them and bring a smaller runner in. So it'll sort of be interesting to see which way the West Coast Match Committee go with it. Obviously, do we think Crowley will continue to run on Shuey as he normally does?
Well, he has been their most damaging player in terms of you don't want to tag Pritis anymore. You just let him accumulate them and burn the ball. So other than Shuey, there's not too many others. I'm not sure if I can't remember if Wellingham's even really worth a tag, or you let Gaff run on the wing with a matchup.
Gaff, and I mean Matt Rose is another one who sort of tends to get under the guard a little bit, because obviously Tendai will probably pick up that second player. So it'll be interesting to see which way they go, and also whether in the past they've had Nat Fyfe playing on Scott Selwood, or Scott Selwood's played on Fyfe, whether they decide to go with that matchup as well, because obviously Selwood's one of their better ball winners, but if he's going to play on Fyfe, it's also going to probably negate some of the strengths of him as well.
If someone like a Barlow comes back in, could you see Fyfe playing more forward to try and alleviate our issues down there? Not obviously for a full game, but could you see him floating down there a bit more often?
I'd prefer that if we start to get Daniel Pearce and Stephen Hill on the ball and get some fleet runners basically running away from their slow, ordinary midfield. So it'd definitely help if Barlow, Mundy, Stephen Hill and Crowley and all those guys are at the feet of our 200-game ruckman, which is just a little side note we got. That's going to be a great chance to push Fyfe forward and hopefully get on the end of a lot of our midfield set of clearances.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, probably a good time, as you mentioned, Seppo, to comment on Sandy's 200th. There's been a lot of times through the years whether we thought whether he'd actually make it even to 100 or 150, but someone like himself, particularly after the last couple of years with those foot injuries, I think any player to make 200 games is a fantastic effort, particularly anyone from over West Australia with the extra travel, and particularly his size as well, is a pretty fair effort.
Yeah, I suppose after that 2000, I think it was 2010, he got the All-Australian ruckman. He's really struggled to put a full season together with his, his turf toe. He's been poked in the eye a couple of times, had his jaw broken by that Melbourne player, I think it was Spencer, that late last year, and had to come back wearing the helmet. So I think it's a great testament that he's reached this milestone, plus with being a big man, having to cover so many Ks back and forward with that journey, as well as the fact that he signed a year contract extension either at the start of this year or at the end of last, that he knows his body's good to go around again. So not only we're worried about losing our big three this year, Sandy thinks he's going to go around again, which makes it seem better. But I just hope he's up for a big one and coming up against a Cox and Nat Nui. This is a great chance for him to show that he's one of the best ruckmen in the game.
Absolutely. If De Boer does keep his spot this week, do you think he goes to Elliot Yeo, or do you think they'll maybe run him off? Who else? Or do you think obviously Bennell? You'd have to think would probably go to Ballantyne.
Yeah.
Who do you? Well, I mean, they haven't really got anyone else that you would. I mean, Yeo provides most of that run off that half back line, particularly. I mean, Schofield's there, but I don't know if he'd be the sort of player De Boer would pick up. So.
Well, it could be Hearn if he comes back, but there's very likely. I think he's not a chance to come back into the side. But you think Yo's been one of their better ball users off the half back that De Boer should really go on to keep accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other matchups that you will think Justine will be interesting on the day, or?
Oh yeah, you guys keep going. You're right.
I mean,
well, the only thing I can see is trying to limit the impact, and they haven't really fired too many shots of Darling and Josh Kennedy. Those two guys are usually been quite dominant, and I haven't watched too many Eagles games this year, but even just reading the stats, they don't look like they have been up to scratch as what they have the last few years. And I don't know if it's due to their midfield entries forward, or those guys are just down on form and missing shots. So hopefully, McFarlane, Johnson, and Dawson can keep those two big targets down to a handful of goals in between them, or hopefully zip. But that'll be going a long way, because I don't think Eagles are capable of kicking big scores. And it's not like we are at the moment, but I think we can limit at least the damage on the board by keeping those guys quiet.
I mean, the interesting one will be how they go with that third tall. I mean, they obviously would like to get Michael Johnson to be the loose man down there, because he plays the role so well. And so if they do, if they rest Lycett up there, or the rotating ruckman, whether it be Cox, Nat Nui, or Lycett, you'd have to think Zach Dawson will pick him up. You'd have to think McFarlane will go on Kennedy.
Mm.
So obviously that leaves whether, because if we look at who else we've got down back there, I'm not convinced Duffield could play on him, on Darling. And then you've really got Clancy Pearce down there, or Sutcliffe. So it's going to be a struggle to get that third. So it'd be interesting to see whether they consider bringing Ibbotson in to see if he could play, because Ibbotson would at least be a little bit better, I think, on that as a third man, or playing that role on Darling, than probably Duffield. I think Duffield might struggle against Darling if he plays down there.
Definitely. The biggest problem with Ibbotson is Ibbotson can play tall, but at the moment his injury is that shoulder, and without him the ability to go up for spoils and put his hands above his head, you can know that's going to could backfire if he's not confident with playing, especially if he's given that role on a taller Eagles forward line.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing was he did play for Peel, and obviously they thought he was going to be out for 5 or 6 weeks, and he came back well earlier than anyone expected. And I mean, he didn't spoil a lot in that game when I saw him against East Fremantle, and obviously he missed last week. So whether there was a complication there or not. As you said, it would be a risk though, because if he does it again and his shoulder goes in the first 5 minutes, then all of a sudden you've burnt your sub straight away. So that might be a consideration as well. They'd have to be 100% sure on...
if he did it again, would that be surgery as well?
Yeah, it'd almost be like what Fife had with his shoulder popping out and the chance to play through heavily strapped or go under the knife. And you think that early in the season they might get that out of the way if it does pop out again. And Ibbetson's not really a type that you want to go through a whole year of playing and coming out of the sides with a sore shoulder. So hopefully, maybe I heard the injury, or not the injury, the reason we missed that Peel game was illness, not due to a flare up of that initial shoulder. So it would have been a shame that he didn't actually play just last week, because that could have been a full game and tested out and the ability to jump back into the side and strengthen our back line. But I really don't see him popping up, even if he gets through the training session. And really just watch that shoulder and make sure it's 100%.
Yeah, I think the interesting one I think it won't be so much the main key players this week in the Derby who'll make the difference. I think it's going to be that second tier on both sides. Like for us, it'll be guys like Nick Subin if he plays, or Lockie Neal, those type of guys, where for the Eagles it'll probably be Jamie Cripps, Mark Hutchings, those Brad Shepherd, those even Gaff to a lesser degree, but those type of players, even Wellingham, who was pretty poor, didn't get a lot of it last week. So I think it's going to be those second tier players, whichever one of those guys stand up a little bit better and provide a bit more support to the main runners out there, I think that could end up making a bit of a difference, in the final wash-up. Obviously, Maston's been playing reasonably well as well, so he sort of runs through that half-forward midfield. So it'd be interesting to see how they utilise and who they decide to run those players on in the game.
I think if we're going to go winning this game after our performance against North, we're going to require that lift out of that second tier or third tier group of players like Clark and Main and De Boer and Soup, and they're the guys that we want to lift and have better games than they did last week. Minus the inclusions, because obviously you can improve it straight away by getting guys that are hungry to come back into the side, and some of the emotional factors. If you've got Sandi out there playing his 200th with Morabito coming on as a sub, it's going to help us go along the way to the winning this game. And I just hope we can get more out of those fringe players that really now there's a lot more pressure on for spots rather than being gifted games through injury, because there's a lot of guys that are getting fit and putting good performances on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, at the end of the day, that's really, I think it's going to be, for us, a crucial game in terms of our top four aspirations. And, the reality is if we want to be a top four side, we have to beat someone like West Coast. Yeah,
if we lose this game, you can almost, it's going to be extremely difficult, but you could almost scratch that top four based on how tight the ladder's going to be at the end of the year. Like you mentioned earlier, we're going to really need to win 2 out of our next 3 if we want top 4. If we lose this one, we'd have to beat Port and Geelong to really, 2 8-point games almost to really set ourselves up. But who do you both think we're going to get for the Ross Glendenning medal this week?
Barlow, if he plays, he seems to rack him up a fair bit.
Yeah, I think he's had, 3 out of his past 6 times he's played in a derby?
Yeah, he's usually a
good strike rate.
Let's give it to Sandi in game 200.
Yeah, I reckon Sandi, he could have a dominant game, if not 5. Sandi or 5 for me.
Yeah, 5's the other one. He would obviously, and I think because 5's got that ability to go forward. So, if you're getting quite a few possessions and you're kicking goals, I think it's a pretty good recipe for standing out in those type of games. So it'll be interesting. And the other interesting one will be obviously Pav as well. Pav normally does pretty well in the derby.
Especially when he outscores the whole Eagles side.
Well, absolutely. And obviously McGovern will probably go out this week with Darren Glass coming back in, and he should be still thanking his lucky stars after that 1 week suspension against Wingard. But so you'd have to think McGovern will be one definite change for them. But it'll be, as I said, it'll be interesting to see if they go as tall as they did against Carlton, or whether they bring in a couple of extra runners. I haven't seen a lot of East Perth or their fringe players, but I don't think they've got a heap down there. Obviously, with guys like, obviously young Sheeter, who I think will be a very good player, but if he's already pushing into your best 22, I don't think there's a lot of else in terms of depth down there for them to bring into the side. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. Any other points you want to bring up, Justine, about the game this week?
No, just looking forward to it, and hopefully we can respond and just use the ball a bit better and get back some of that hunger that seems to be just lacking a tiny bit, just a fraction off. Obviously, last couple of weeks have been a bit disappointing. So, yeah, hopefully, like you said, big game for the club and obviously big rivalry. So hopefully we can come out and really make a mark and get our season back on track.
How about you, Steppo? Any other points you want to bring up? Or?
I just want to get back on the winners list. I'm sick of guys over here in Melbourne rubbing it in that we've, dropped the bundle and now we're not destined for top 4. I just want to get back on that winners list, and I hope the players do too.
Yeah, I think obviously that, as you said, there's been a lot of talk about culture and all this sort of stuff and the suspensions and the whatnot. But as you said, I think you just need one of those really. We've only got to look at what happened to Collingwood after they played us round 1. The world was doomed and everything's doom and gloom, and then obviously they've been able to turn it around the last month or so, and just needs a couple of good performances, then everything gets back on track and all of a sudden you're looking good. But when you don't have the ball like we did last week and we kept turning it over, you're obviously going to look a lot poorer when you're chasing than when you've actually got the ball. And it'd be interesting to see if West Coast, like last week, North Melbourne did use the slingshot a couple of times really well. They were holding the ball. They pushed right up and then they just kicked it long, and the speed of North Melbourne were able to get away from some of our defenders. So it'll be interesting to see how what Ross Lyon combats that if it happens, and B, whether West Coast adapt that type of tactic or not. So particularly with their tall, I don't think it'll be quite as easy for them because they've obviously got a number of taller forwards. So, but it will definitely be a game of two contrasting styles, I think, this week. But I think Fremantle need to be able to lower their eyes, bringing the ball inside 50, rather than just being pav-centric. And probably even if you just clear the 50 out and leave it one-on-one, and if they're going to sag off that much, then obviously you've got to utilise those guys inside and around the 50 as much.
Oh, and there's one more point you just mentioned on Pavlich, that he is sitting on 597 career goals. There is a chance he might kick 3 and tick over 600, which will be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he's currently the highest goal scorer in the AFL.
Only 3 or 4 in front of Buddy, so hopefully he can keep that margin and hit the big 600 mark.
No, absolutely. All right, so come down to the big time for the tips this week. What do you think, Justine? What tip?
Oh, I always tip Fremantle, even if I think they're going to lose. But hopefully we should bounce back this week, and I'll tip us by 16 points.
Okay, and Seppo, how about yourself?
I'm feeling a lot more confident than I was at the start of the week. Still not as much as what I think. Probably about Freo by 18 points.
Okay, and I'll go a little bit better. I think the inclusion of Valentine will make a big difference, and I think if we particularly get on top early and West Coast get the jitters in front of goals early, if they start kicking one or quite a few points early, and I know we're no Lone Ranger in that either, but I think if they start kicking a few points, it sort of, particularly after the last few weeks with their goal kicking, I think it's going to be really critical for them. So I think I can see Ross Lyon packing that inside defensive 50 in the middle there and making him kick from the pockets to make it much more difficult. And I think Fremantle will get up by 32 points this week. So let's hopefully, we'll, as you said, Seppo, get back on the winners list and get our season back on track after a couple of probably performances that aren't up to the standard that we've seen over the last year or so, that's for sure. All right, anything else, Seppo, you want to bring up for the Big Footy listeners this week?
No, that's it for this week. Make sure everyone's checking the forum. We've had an update a couple of hours this morning. I couldn't get on, and we're all back into it. Hopefully we have a win and we can all have a lot more toast threads and a lot less roast threads. And we'll see you all back on the forum next week.
Okay, and thanks again for joining us, Justine, this week.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Okay, and we will see you all again next week. Bye for now.